Welcome to the Regeneration Collective podcast, the next UN Visions for a Regenerative Future. I'm Silke von Brockhausen, a UN insider with 18 years across more than a dozen UN missions and founder of the Regeneration Collective. As the UN approaches its 80th year and the campaign for the next Secretary General gets underway, amid protracted conflicts, widening inequalities, and crossed planetary boundaries, we asked, how can the UN become the platform through which people, institutions, and the more than human world repair and transform broken systems and create conditions where life can thrive? In each episode, we speak with regenerative practitioners, policy shapers, indigenous knowledge holders, peace builders, culture makers, and frontline humanitarians about the lived experiences and visions that could translate into regenerative UN policies, organizational culture, and operations. This is for UN staff, partners, member states, and bridge builders who are curious about what regeneration means in practice and who are ready to turn the UN into a trailblazer for this shift. And today we are honored to welcome Konkanko to the next UN podcast. Konkanko is a social entrepreneur, indigenous environmental leader, and facilitator of South-North partnerships based in Cameroon, who has dedicated more than 4 decades to weaving networks for system change. He's the founder of Better World Cameroon, the Bafoot Eco-Village, and Ndanifo Trust, pioneering regenerative food systems, youth empowerment, and cultural resilience in the face of conflict and climate crisis. Through these initiatives, Joshua at Konkanko, has trained hundreds of young people, especially women, in African permaculture, food sovereignty, and community-based leadership. Konkanko's work bridges indigenous African wisdom with global sustainability frameworks such as the SDGs, advocating for trade, not aid, and building trust-based partnerships that challenge inequality. He's also the co-founder of African Way and Indigenous and Modern Platforms for reimagining futures grounded in reciprocity, regeneration, and cultural renewal. As a member of the Conscious Food Systems Alliance in our council, Joshua continues to inspire the next generation of leaders by showing that work is love made visible and that community-rooted innovation can reshape both local livelihoods and global governance. I'm impressed just reading your CV, Konkanko, and very much a warm welcome to you here to this podcast.
You said so many things about me. I feel almost shy to accept all of them. But when you are initiated into eldership from the age of 13, then you grow up having so many feathers in your cap, as we call it in our indigenous systems.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and I'm so looking forward to hearing more from your feathers of wisdom today. And maybe the first question that I'm starting to ask all the podcast guests is, for our listeners who don't know much about regeneration yet, could you explain the term in simple, practical terms? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, we can look at it scientifically and in the way that indigenous people understand regeneration, because regeneration is an English word. We know that we generate the things that we need in our lives. Like science has taught us, we can generate current. We can generate so many things, but nature itself generates life. So today, if we are talking about regeneration, then it means something degenerated and we have to regenerate, as it were. So basically, it's about having healthy systems, because life is meant, the nature, Mother Earth is out to bring healthy system, pure, like pure water. Anything that is natural is pure. And if we need to regenerate, it means that we did some things wrong that either contaminated or caused the things to degenerate. So regeneration includes healing. Maybe I should further expand about the why I say healing, because the systems, when they are not in a natural state, it means they are unwell and they need healing. And it's not only about physical bodies, it also includes spiritual things like relationships. So we cannot heal or regenerate nature, if we do not also heal and regenerate what is wrong inside of us, because the degeneration that we cause in the first place. That's what I wanted to add to the regeneration,
That's
physical
beautiful. It
and
all
spiritual.
starts with us. Yes, we need to be the change to be able to make life find its path and regenerate again. In your view, why do you think this concept, and it's more older than the word regeneration, I think it has been with humanity since the dawn of the days, but why is it especially important at the moment in this time of many crises, but also many opportunities?
Well, life has a way of regenerating itself. And when that time for regeneration comes, so many things happen. So you mentioned yourself, polycrisis means that we can do something to address the situation. And what we can do is like what nature does. So it's very important at this moment because whether we will do it or not, nature will do it for us. We have had prehistoric stories where we heard about dinosaurs. What happened that they became extinct? In modern history, we know that we have had empires and what happened that these empires crumbled. So at every turn of a century, something happens to remind us humans that we need to make a change. And if we don't make the change, nature will make the change by itself. So many things can go wrong. We know that a whole civilization can either we participate or nature will do it by itself. We know we have a lot of natural disasters. So we need to sit at this moment and really see where we are in the turn of the century. So what I'm trying to refer to is the fact that there must be a cause for something to degenerate. So we are having this opportunity because inside every problem is also the solution. So we can look inside the problem and we will find the solution. What are the problems? You have mentioned polycrisis. The crises that we see outside the environment are also the crises that we have inside ourselves. Because in nature, nothing is created, nothing is destroyed. And we are connected. Everything is interconnected. So the issue here, why it's so much important is because of the separations that we have created between ourselves, between our families, in our communities. We've sectioned life out of the cycle of life itself. So we have global north, we have global south, we have rich, we have poor. We've created all these classes which no longer fit into the cycles of life. So nature, the Mother Earth is telling us that it's time to put a square peg in a square hole and a round peg in a round hole. So this is how we have generated these institutions and the systems. And you happen to mention UN, which is the regulating body of all these systems, as far as I know. In my background in journalism, I learned and one of my modules, the UN system. And when I came to understand it, I started to call it United Nonsense in terms from the African perspective, because it didn't make sense that some people will divide other people's cultures and impose their systems on the natural systems. I can say this because at that time, I was initiated into the elders of my village or my Bafut kingdom. The kingdom was still having its values and its own institutions. But I saw them forcefully destroyed and another system imposed on the system. And so I started to question why this body that is supposed to keep the world in a healthy state is causing all these fractures and all the cracks in the system. So maybe this is, you've mentioned policy. It was policy. in my action in Africa in trying to formulate another way of partnering with the North, because we cannot also section and start to say they and us. The world is all about us, because I use Ndanifo, which is Ubuntu as used in our kingdom, to kind of decipher the way that I could bring community resilience. And that is how I succeeded to create indigenous systems that combines science and modern thinking to transition our kingdom to resilience. There is a lot of crisis in a country they call Ambazonia that is not known in the UN, but that is this system created by the UN, who UN can also find healing if we find the root causes of the problems that the UN has either resolved or not resolved. And this polycrisis putting gaping holes into seeing exactly what the UN has done right or has not done right and what can be put right. That's why I say square pegs. I'm sure you understand this. I think it's very important at this moment to look at the UN. Everybody is looking at the UN because I knew there was a time they were saying water for the all by the year 2000. It didn't happen. We had Millennium Goals with 8 goals. Africa didn't even attain one of the goals. Now we have SDGs. So I began to ask myself, what is the relation with UN and Africa? And how can this relation contribute in creating a healthy relationship between the so-called global north and the global south? I've experimented with what I did in Cameroon. We have Ubuntu to Kapwa, which is a system that we have created a South-South dialogue. We started with the countries that have faced disasters like the Philippines. We worked with Colombia because they have an Ubuntu center in Colombia, which is also learning from Africa. And the Global Eco Village Network. I think the Eco Village as a community system or building systems can bring some solutions of regeneration to the UN if they look at it in the way that the UN believes that the world can now become one community, not one preying on the other. But I think here I'm trying to say that the relationship between Africa and the West is very important because of the resources. We know that Africa was partitioned for a reason. And I started by saying when the first kings were sending emissaries to meet kings in Africa, they were talking about trade. We know about the Silk Route. We know about the spices from India. But at what time did it turn from trade to colonization and to open extraction and from friendship to war? These are some of the important gaping holes that the UN might like to look into.
Thank you so much, Konkanko. You opened up so many different roads we can take our conversations from here, and you gave a beautiful overview over a global perspective on what we need to look at if we really want to transform the UN into a platform that can be truly useful to adapt to the current crisis, and that we do need to regenerate it also from inside. Can you elaborate a little bit more from your perspective as an elder and a wisdom keeper on what it is that the UN can learn from Africa, from the culture, from the mindset, on the way how you relate with each other and with the earth and nature that we are all part of? What is it now that the UN should start listening more, which it might not have in the past?
There are a lot of voices that are saying, stop the Cold War, stop reigniting the Cold War, because the situation of Africa, and I can mention Ambazonia, which was southern Cameroon then. What I heard was that we were sympathetic to the social system coming in from Russia, then was called socialist republics. This is a key thing that diverted the way that we were doing business at that time, trade or something, and completely created what we now have today. These voices are saying that the wars that we have in Africa, we don't have arm industry in Africa. Where do the bombs, where do the guns come from? The causes for which we deploy the resources of the world are not healing. They are not for healing. The causes for which Africa was repartitioned, sources, or who owns the people's culture, who owns the resources below our feet, our lands, and the issue of land grabbing and all these issues of what we call today systems is actually education system that was brought to Africa, is actually economic systems that were brought to Africa, belief systems that were brought to Africa. Religion, Catholicism was not the original belief of the African. And the Africans are saying our Ubuntu system want us to understand that we are all the same, even if these systems are separating us. We have never created arms to go and fight the West out of Africa. And we haven't stopped building friendship with the rest of the world. The issue of this divide is an issue that the Africans expected the UN to resolve. So the UN has the capacity, it has all the skill sets in the system for healing the world. But the question is the terminologies that we use. We call it politics or policies or geopolitics, whatever. As an indigenous person, I don't understand where these actually are taking us to, whether they are resolving the issues or creating more complexity in resolving the issue. Can African or indigenous systems contribute? Because the indigenous systems have proven resilient over millennia. And why should they systematically be exterminated at a certain point? So the healing of relationships, because it is our minds, our hearts that control our actions and our words. So it is understandable how did it come that all the cultures that contributed the beauty of the world we now have a unique world with one, like we have a bridge with only one direction, and everything has to be generated from the north and then replicated, which means there are no different perspectives to life anymore. There is only one perspective. So what is the perspective of Africa? I'm saying this because I've experimented with our own indigenous system. I know today that people use Ubuntu to sell software or they use it for other purposes, but it is what has made the African who they are, even with all the suppression of the systems, they're still resilient. What is this thing that makes us resilient? It's what you mentioned in my work. I had believed from my initiation, because the elders informed us through the rite of passage, that once you love work, you put your love in the work, like the coat of many colors. It has value. So our passion is what we love. So love, real work is love made visible. Today we find people who are doing their jobs in hospitals, in companies with no joy. And that kind of work cannot produce joy for the people who consume the end products. So can this inform the way that we call learning? I know it's called education. In my system, we don't believe in education from the West because it's top down. Even in academia, in institutions, in economic system, it is top down, one-way traffic. Can we build bridges that are two-way traffic? These are some of the things that I have experimented in my work right up to the UN system, UNEP, UNDP. We've done all this. But then it's also about how we structure development. How do we fund? The funds go to those who are not doing the work, and those who do the work are slaves in the system. So they bring their misery and their slavery into the products that we consume. So the children who go into the supermarkets and they enjoy chocolate should know that it brings them the misery of the children who are dying of the blood of the children. Actually, that's what they are. Nobody tells them that these supermarkets are not cocoa plantations. They are not the cocoa tree. And nobody tells them that they are not manufactured in Switzerland or that these trees are not in Switzerland or in Belgium, wherever the brand of the chocolate. So there is something wrong in the language of our hearts. And I think this is where the solution begins.
I love this coming back to our hearts and seeing love as work made as seeing work as love made visible, going there with passion, what you do with an intention that's not guided by your rational mind, but by the love for yourself, for your community, for the planet. And being much more aware of where we are disconnected from nature and where we might need to um, better show our kids where their food comes from, but also changing our whole way of educating ourselves and seeing it more as an exploration, as a two-way street, as learning from each other in humbleness, right? And with curiosity to see what other people already have found as a solution. So thank you for sharing this very deep wisdom. And for me, what you have described is the essence of regenerative leadership, that a true leader in a regenerated UN would embody all of this in the way of leading. And I have one question for you that I ask all of my podcast guests is, if you would be elected as the next Secretary General and you start your office on the 1st of January 2027, what would be on your top agenda to implement across the UN institution that you are leading as the CEO in 193 countries with about 130,000 staff? But without actually an executive power to really make all member states comply. But at least you have this opportunity to guide the system itself into a new direction. So, long question short, what would your agenda as Secretary General look like to transform it into a better platform for change? Easy question.
Yeah, I laugh because I don't know the credentials, but then I never dreamt because I don't know how many PhDs UN Secretary General should have because the piece of paper matters so much in the West. But if I were to be a leader to resolve issues, the first thing that I would do is to go to the root causes of where it all went wrong. I would convene another Berlin conference. That is the first thing that I would do. I don't know if that file exists in the UN because we cannot see. We are probably, if I resolve issues as an indigenous person, I look for the root causes of the issue. So the world order of today, after the League of Nations, what happened? I'll look into the files and to correct those. You might think I would look for a big economic paradigm. No, I think that the values that have made the UN what it is today, there are no more human values. For example, we are talking about peace by making war. We are talking about regeneration, but extracting and not looking. We can't talk about equality without human rights. The UN is the epitome of where human rights, which should be seen. And so I would look at the very little issues that has caused the broken relationships in humanity. That will be the file that I will deal with first of all. I would ask for the file of Dag Hammarskjöld, the Swedish UN Secretary General, that his plane was grounded in the Amazon, the second lung of the world. What happened? So, because this is how we resolve problems in the indigenous system. There are things that once you don't see what is causing the wounds and we just look at symptoms, like fever is not a disease. If we cure fever, we are not curing the person. This is how we look at it in our indigenous systems. Because I am sure that all the solutions in the UN are in the UN. If I were in the UN Secretary General, those are kind of files, two files I would look into.
And that is so key to look really deeper at the story of origin of the UN and also uncover a lot of the mistakes that were made and make sure that they are not impeding on any future transformation anymore and keep us back. And I watched the movie about Dag Hammarskjöld, and I loved also one of his famous quote was, "The UN was not created to bring humanity to heaven, but to save it from hell." And learning more about his vision and work is deeply inspiring to all of us UN staff, I would say. And looking forward, now imagine we have started to uncover and to look at the root causes. We do need to also, I think, change a lot in the organizational culture and the way we manage our staff inside of the UN. And I feel we can learn a lot also from your wisdom, from the wisdom of elders from around the world, from indigenous leaders on basic regenerative leadership skills. And you mentioned already in the beginning of our conversation, one of the key elements is start building a container of trust and better relations within our organization. And can you give us some advice on your work, how an organization such as the UN can proceed to establish more trust and nourishing soil for change and transformation in times that are very unsettling right now for UN staff and all of us?
Now you talk about nourishing soils. You know, the indigenous people have done only that for all the time that we have seen us living on this earth. We are the closest to the earth. We live off the land, even when we don't have land. So the issue is using the resources of the world to barricade the masses from the world. So the resources, my work, for example, has never been funded. So I stopped looking for funding and just left working with Mother Earth, with nature. Yeah. So such a system would have been like in our community, the handicapped people, the blind people, all the socially excluded are sought after by the community and they are held like kings to feel they belong and they are cared for. This is the beginning of humanity. If you're a mother, you know what that means. When you have a baby, the baby is helpless. Sometimes you have to put the breast milk right into the baby's mouth. You have to carry the baby. You have to take care of when the baby poops. All this stuff, what happens to the have-nots? So funding should look for people who are doing the work or who need rather than the people giving. I worked in social security income and so or what they call social insurance. And it's for the rich. So we rob Peter to pay Paul. The people who are actually needing and doing the work and needing the nourishing are not nourished. So why do we have systems that are supposed to, if we are talking about, it's not even equity. It is just simply keeping a healthy system. Why do we have broken systems? So what I'm trying to bring here is that regeneration is not any complex thing. Nature by itself it's always generating. Soils, if left to themselves, would regenerate. So what are the obstacles? It's money. The issue is there is the law of money as opposed to money serving life. What do we do with the money?
Mm.
Even the technology that has come up in the world today, atomic energy can be used for civil purposes and everyone will be fine. But what do we use it for? So these are things that I am not, as an indigenous person, saying I know more than the scientists. I don't know more than the politicians or more than the economists. Unfortunately, we haven't heard so much from the economists for a long while about
Mm.
the real solutions to broken economy. So somehow, if we are humble enough, we will give respect to Mother Nature, Mother Earth, from where all these resources come from. Where does money
Mm.
come from? What is the benefit? Take my work, for example, because you asked particularly about me. Who has the property rights of this information that I'm giving to you? So these are basic questions that there are existing regulations on how we can have balanced development or community development and international development. The issue is
Mm.
not even laws. It is the purpose and the application. I'm not into geopolitics or into what we are actually pursuing at the UN. I'm not a staff. I've never benefited from the UN system, although I've worked so much for it. I even have a project on the platform of the UN SDGs. But I
Mm.
know that it's the way of the African to contribute, and it's not an investment. I would have first of all asked myself who benefits from this contribution that I bring,
Mm.
because I'm contributing to extraction. But how can we look at the world and be at peace and be happy? I'm happy contributing because I think in my heart, I am loving the world. I'm loving life and giving to life.
Mm. Thank you, Konkanko. And I think you have given the next Secretary General a lot of philosophical questions to think about. And you flagged a lot of the problems I'm also still pondering about reciprocity, about social justice, about valuing, also caring for people, valuing nature, valuing wisdom. And I think these are all questions that we don't ask ourselves often enough when we engage in our daily work at the UN and beyond. So I think you gave us so many pearls of wisdom, and I'm eternally grateful for your time also and for sharing this. I have so many more questions for you, and I really enjoyed listening to your deep, deep, deep wisdom. We need much more of who are embodying this lived wisdom of Mother Earth and help us all and guide us all on the right way towards a better future. So thank you very much, Konkanko, for the time and the wisdom again. And I wish you all the best on your mission. And hopefully we can collaborate in the future and talk again. Thank you.